This is the story of the U.S. Army's 23rd Infantry Regiment and its stand at Chipyong Knee. It's a story of leadership and courage and firepower. In June 1950, North Korea invaded South Korea. The North Korean People's Army, the NKPA, drove the U.S. 8th Army and what was left of the Republic of Korea Army, the ROK, south down to the end of the peninsula. Then the 8th Army went on the attack in its turn, forcing the NKPA back north. The 8th Army and the ROK went deep into North Korea, only 45 miles from the Chinese border at the Yalu River. That brought the Chinese into the war. They attacked, and their People's Liberation Army, the PLA, drove the 8th Army and the ROKs 40 miles south of Seoul, the South Korean capital. Along the way, they trapped the U.S. 2nd Infantry Division and tore it apart. The 2nd Division was surrounded by the PLA near the village of Kunu-ri. All day long, the 23rd Infantry fought off the enemy to the north, while the rest of the division got on jeeps, trucks, and tanks and tried to race through the PLA fire blocks along the road to the south. The lead units made it through, but the rest were trapped in the dark on a road choked with wrecks when the PLA came down out of the hills and wiped them out. The division lost 3,000 men, all its artillery, and hundreds of jeeps and trucks. The 23rd Infantry held until dark and escaped to the west without serious loss. In January 1951, the 8th Army stopped the PLA, went over to the attack, and gained back some of what they'd lost in their long retreat south. In February, the PLA attacked again, and once more, the 23rd Infantry was surrounded, this time in the town of Chipyong-ni, about 40 miles southeast of Seoul. The 23rd Infantry, with 4,500 men, had been in Chipyong-ni since February 3rd, running patrols into the hills and valleys around the town and digging in. Colonel Paul Freeman, the regiment's commander, put his 4 infantry battalions, 3 from the U.S. and 1 from France, in a tight circle around the town and backed them with his artillery, tanks, and anti-aircraft guns. On February 12th, Freeman got word that the PLA was coming for the town. His nearest help was 12 miles away. He asked to withdraw to the south, but General Matthew Ridgway, 8th Army commander, ordered him to stay. Colonel Freeman called his officers together and said, "We're surrounded, but we'll stay here and fight it out." By nightfall on February 13th, 6 PLA regiments with about 10,000 men were in the hills around the town. Starting at 10 that night, the PLA hit the 23rd Infantry's defenses with mortar and machine gun fire. For the next 9 hours, they struck again and again from the north, the west, the southeast, and the south. All night long, the line held everywhere against one company-strength attack after another. This is how a PLA company attacked. In this example, 3 U.S. platoons in positions built around their machine guns and automatic rifles, with their riflemen filling in among them, are defending along a ridge cut by a shallow draw, a low-lying channel in the slope. The PLA commanders study the U.S. defenses from a distance during the day. After dark, they send in scouts for a closer look. They decide to attack up the draw, where there is the most cover and a gap between 2 of the U.S. platoons. Guided by the scouts, the PLA company moves into a ready position, hidden at the foot of the draw. After a short artillery or mortar attack, the company commander sounds his bugle, the platoon commanders blow their whistles, and the assault begins. The PLA soldiers follow a path marked by the scouts up the draw into the U.S. defenses. The lead squad in each platoon uses hand grenades. The next squad has submachine guns, and behind them comes a squad with rifles. They rush forward until they break through or the defenders' fire cuts them down. A second platoon follows, and then a third. If they fail, the survivors from all three platoons regroup and try again. The PLA called this hammering style of attack on a narrow front sticking a long, sharp-pointed knife into the enemy's weak spot. This is how the 3rd Battalion, 23rd Infantry built up its defenses along a 2,500-yard front on the south side of Chipyong Ni. First, the battalion commander told his companies where to set in. He put E Company across the easiest routes for a PLA assault, the road and railroad tracks on his left, F Company covering the open ground in the center, and G Company facing a cluster of huts and beside a road leading into the town on his right. The company officers had their men dig foxholes big enough for two, deep enough to stand in, and covered to protect against mortar and artillery fire. And they put in their best firepower, their machine guns. 14 of them aimed to fire streams of bullets along enemy approach routes and across the front of the company positions. Then came 6 recoilless rifles. They could fire rounds loaded with 170 steel slugs that could cut down whole squads of attackers in a single shot. There was more killing power from 13 mortars set up to fire targets planned in advance to make a line of exploding shells across the battalion's front. And even more firepower from 3 tanks, each with 2 machine guns and a cannon, and 3 anti-aircraft guns, each with 4 machine guns. They were on a rise where they could cover the railroad and main road and fire across most of the battalion's front. While the foxholes were dug and the big weapons set up, the battalion strung barbed wire and put out mines to slow PLA attackers that got in close. With all its weapons firing, the battalion could put up a wall of fire against a PLA assault. The PLA attacked the 3rd Battalion on the night of February 13-14. It went like this. The attack started with a heavy mortar barrage. Then 2 PLA infantry companies came at E Company in tight columns, but the fire from the tanks, anti-aircraft guns, and machine guns blunted the PLA's thrust before it even reached the wire. The PLA fell back, regrouped, and tried again, but the second attack faltered in another storm of fire from E Company's position. Another PLA company attacked on the 3rd Battalion's right. Using the cover of the huts in front of G Company, PLA soldiers got through the mines and the wire and in among G Company's foxholes, but counterattacks drove them out. The 23rd Infantry spent the day of the 14th taking in supplies dropped by air, dealing with casualties from the last night's fighting, and preparing for the PLA attack they knew would come after dark. The PLA hit G Company at 1 in the morning, right where they stuck in the knife the night before, and they kept coming, squad after squad from 2 companies, pushing G Company back to the edge of the village in an hour and a half of hard fighting. 3rd Battalion attacked 3 times to regain G Company's lost position, but the PLA held on until 4:30 on the afternoon of February 15th. Finally, tank fire, artillery attacks, and airstrikes drove the PLA away. Just as they pulled back, tanks and infantry from the U.S. 5th Cavalry Regiment broke through and came to the help of the 23rd Infantry. When night came, the PLA left the hills around Chipyong and headed north. The battle was over. The 23rd Infantry's fight at Chipyong was a big victory for the 8th Army. There were 3 reasons for it. The PLA hit the 23rd Infantry over and over again from all sides, but only with 1 or 2 companies at a time. That just wasn't enough to break the 23rd Infantry's defenses. The 23rd Infantry had too much firepower for the PLA to overcome. The combined fire of artillery, mortars, tanks, anti-aircraft guns, recoilless rifles, and machine guns did terrible damage to the PLA attackers. After 2 months and 200 miles of retreats, General Ridgway was determined to prove his men could make a stand and beat the PLA. Colonel Freeman was cool and brave all through the battle. Seriously wounded on the first night of the fight, he refused to go to the hospital and stayed in command until the 5th Cavalry came and the PLA disappeared from the hills around the town. The fight at Chipyong cost the 23rd Infantry 52 soldiers killed and 404 missing and wounded. The PLA lost 4,946 men. The 23rd Infantry's stand was a turning point. For 3 months, whenever the PLA got behind an American unit, it fell back. At Chipyong the Americans stayed and fought and won. For the Chinese, it was a bitter lesson. Back in November, the PLA view of the U.S. Army was that their infantrymen are weak, afraid to die, and have no courage to attack or defend. At Chipyong they learned how wrong they were.